So welcome everyone to this Saturday Zoom Zen of July 11th. We are still in a state of ongoing social isolation due to the pandemic. This pandemic has given us a crisis in our human history. There have been pandemics before. In the Middle Ages, we hear reports of epidemics, pandemics that wiped out a great portion of the population. And the latest one that is recorded is in the 1920s when the so-called Spanish flu wiped out also a big number of people across national boundaries. So this coronavirus pandemic comes to us at a time when we already are in a critical situation in our global society. We are always beleaguered by the ongoing violence going on among people for so many reasons, on so many levels. There is the personal violence that is being perpetrated by human beings against others due to animosities. There is the racial, there is the economic, and so many other kinds of violence that are happening in our global society now, and we are all pained by that. If anyone has eyes to hear, eyes to see and ears to hear, one cannot but feel the pain of our current global community in all of this violence. That was even before the pandemic. And now the pandemic comes and heightens the divisions among us, leaving the more economically disadvantaged really as the more vulnerable part of our population, dying by the multitudes in so many places around the world. And again, our hearts are laden with pain in knowing all of that, in seeing all of that in the media, and in holding that in our hearts. But again, what I would like to highlight here is that this situation that has brought a lot of uncertainty and social isolation and pain and suffering, which you've heard me note before, can also be an opportunity for a new turn in our history. How can that be? I would like to focus on one aspect of a side effect of this pandemic, namely this social isolation that we are now being required to undertake to protect ourselves and to protect others from contracting the virus, so that we do not give the virus to one another. So we are enjoined all to be socially isolated, and there are different restrictions based on the different areas that we live. Now, that isolation can turn into a sense of separation and alienation, and it can also breed a sense of loneliness in us. And as we succumb to those tendencies that the social isolation brings, alienation, separation, loneliness, we feel all the more threatened, and we feel a certain panic that drives us to do, think, and say things that can be destructive. So the question then is, how can we take this situation of social isolation from that destructive tendency to one that precisely can be an opportunity for solitude? Here I take the word solitude as not just as a physical situation, but as an invitation to enter into an inward journey within us. Now, this is an inward journey that is not meant to alienate us from others or separate us further from others. Of course, as we engage in spiritual practice, we need to have that space and that inner as well as outer ambience to be able to enter deep into our inward journey. So there is that certain extent of being in a physical distance as well as psychological distance from others as we engage in spiritual practice. But what it is meant to offer to us is a way precisely to reconnect with the center of what is going on in the world. And here is what I would like to offer. Our Zen practice is precisely a path of spiritual practice that calls for a certain kind of solitude. Not a solitude of escape from the world, not a solitude of separation from the world, but a solitude that allows us to enter within, and in entering within, precisely see our intimate interconnectedness with one another. Solitude, not loneliness. There is a saying that I heard when I was still studying with the Jesuits in Latin, that in English goes, I am least lonely when I am alone. For those of you who want to hear the Latin, it's num quam minus solus quam cum solus. I am least feeling lonely when I am in my solitude. What does that mean? Well, this was a quote, by the way, that had been attributed to Saint Augustine, but finding out some sources, it seems that he had quoted it from some Latin poets, and Cicero is a poet that is recorded as having mentioned this. I am least lonely when I am alone, when I am in my solitude. And this is precisely the opportunity that our Zen practice is inviting us to take, to find that place where I am least lonely, but I am precisely at a state of being connected, interconnected with each and everything, with each and everyone in the whole world. And that will allow us to avoid or to skirt the destructive tendencies that this social distancing forces upon us, that leads us to alienation and loneliness and separation. A kind of situation that makes us feel on edge and turn to weapons of mass distraction, turn to the internet for all sorts of things that will occupy our minds so that we will not feel that loneliness or that sense of lack within. But instead, to turn to spiritual practice. Now, again, that term spiritual can be a pitfall because some would tend to understand it as a realm that is separate from this physical and material aspect of our humanness, thinking that there's a realm separate from it that we can take and escape from this materiality, from this physicality, from this bodiliness that constitutes what we are as human beings. Thinking that to be spiritual is better and to be simply physical is something that is to be denigrated. And that is a dualistic mentality that unfortunately has infected a lot of Western culture and history. We need to see through that and understand that spiritual, to take a working definition given by a set of volumes on world spirituality that was published by Crossroads, understands the term spiritual as the innermost core of the human being, the deepest center of the human being, where we are open to the transcendent, to the holy. And by that measure, in being open to the transcendent and to the holy in the midst of our very physicality and materiality, also to see and be open to the intimate interconnectedness with each and everything, each and everyone in this whole universe. So the turn inward to spiritual practice entails a rediscovery of two important aspects that are interconnected. The rediscovery of the holy in us and in everything, and the rediscovery of that intimate interconnectedness, that in more familiar terms, of our kinship with everyone and everything. And in discovering that, then we know that we are grounded and we are connected and we are never lonely. How can we be lonely when there are the trees, the skies, the pebbles, the stars, and there are dogs and cats, and of course other people whom our hearts are longing to really reach out to and connect with? If we really tap that place where we are in that place of the spirit, the spiritual in our lives, then it opens our hearts to that natural interconnectedness with each and everything, and the natural sense of the holiness of each and everything. That is what the spiritual practice can unleash in us, that sense of the holy and that sense of kinship. So we turn to the spiritual practice and take its concrete guidelines for entering into that realm that brings out the sense of the holy, brings out that sense of deep kinship through the breath. The word spiritual, by the way, as many of you would know, relates to the term breath. This, of course, is evident in the Jewish and Christian traditions that most of us are familiar with, but it is also in the Chinese religions, it's also in Hinduism, it is also in Islam, it's also in other traditions, that the breath is the gateway to that spiritual realm. In fact, spiritus comes from the word breath, ruah or pneuma or ruh in Arabic. That breath that vivifies and gives life and that connects and that allows the holy to come forth. So what is Zen practice all about? It's taking a posture conducive to stillness, being aware of the breath as we receive it and as we give it back. So as we simply sit here breathing in and breathing out, just allow that breath to take us to that deepest core of our being. And as we do so, and as we settle into that, and as we let our minds come home to that, and let our hearts be warmed in being there, the floodgates open up. The floodgates of the holy. The floodgates of that kinship that makes us all who we are. Thich Nhat Hanh uses the word interbeing, that sense that we are all interbeing with one another. Enables me to feel the joys of everyone who is celebrating, but also to feel the pain of everyone who is in pain. So what is the outcome? What is the fruit of this spiritual practice? If taken in the right direction, it can precisely turn our gaze from this little self that is preoccupied with itself and turn it around and see that the big self, that which makes me who I am, is really each and everyone else. The trees, the mountains, the rivers, the pebbles, the dogs, the cats, but also each and everyone that I meet in my day-to-day life is no other than I, myself. And this inward turn that we take in our spiritual practice gives us that eye to see from a 360-degree angle camera. But perhaps even 360 degrees not enough. We say 360 degrees, and you've seen some photos of that where you see all around and we are given a sense of the panorama. But that's not just the level 360 degrees, it's inside. So it's 360 times 360 degrees, where we see each and everything from the perspective of each and everything. That's mind-boggling. If we think of it, it's beyond our logical comprehension. But that's what the spiritual realm invites us to enter into. That realm where we can see each and everything just as it is, from the point of view of what it is. That is what is said in, that is what is meant in many Buddhist scriptures when it is said that the awakening that the Buddha experienced is one that enabled him to see things just as they are, see things as it is. Yatha bhutam is the word in Sanskrit, to throw in an original term there, but you don't have to remember that. But really to see as it is, and not with the bias of my little selfish motives and interests, and with my own sense of, is this person friendly to me, or is this person going to react to me well or not, and so on. Not that kind of scheming, and not that kind of insecure way of looking at or regarding others, but precisely with a heart open, already having accepted and having embraced each and every one in our hearts. And when we approach people with that natural embrace that we already have, the miraculous thing is that they also embrace back. They feel that, and they also then return to us that embrace, without going in so many words, without being too sentimental or fuzzy about it. There's just that natural sense of kinship that we can feel with each and everyone, even though we may be meeting them for the first time. That is what spiritual practice can allow us to really taste and experience. So now, one pitfall again, even in Buddhism, when we turn to spiritual practice, sometimes we use the words non-self, or we use the word empty, or there's really nothing there, and so on. Those are very, very powerful words that, taken the wrong way, can again lead us into that kind of dualistic way of looking at things. Oh, it's all empty anyway, or there's no self anyway, and so forth. That can make us live in a way that seems to be several feet above the ground, and just looking at it from a separate perspective again, in the name of whatever we hear from our Buddhist vocabulary. But again, we need to see through that delusion and keep being grounded. And yet, in being grounded, our hearts are also as free as a lark, to fly to the ends of the universe. So that groundedness and that freedom to fly wherever our heart leads us is what this practice can empower us to. Let me conclude this offering with the image that is also the logo of our Zen Center, that of Maria Kannon. Maria, of course, is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Kannon is, in Chinese, Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. That is what this practice invites us to embody. What does that mean? Let me cite a koan from the collection known as the Blue Cliff Records, Piyan Lu in Chinese, or Hekegan Roku, as we say in Japanese. And this koan, which is 89th in the collection of this series of Blue Cliff Records, goes like this. Yunyen asked Tao, what does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use so many hands and eyes for? The Bodhisattva of compassion is depicted in many artistic presentations, either in paintings or in sculpture, as having 1,000 arms, with a hand in each arm, of course, and in the center of each hand is an eye that sees. So the question then that this koan begins with is, what does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use so many hands and eyes for? And the answer of Tao Wu is, it's like someone reaching back, groping for a pillow in the middle of the night. That's a puzzling answer. What's that all about? Well, it's just like somebody who's sleeping and then the pillow somehow slides off and you just adjust the pillow and then come back to your sleep without making any big fuss about it. It's, in other words, it's such a natural movement from someone who has experienced that sense of the holy in each and everything, someone who has experienced that sense of deep kinship, that interbeing with each and everything and everyone in the world, naturally becomes like that. What? Somebody who needs to do something and does it and then doesn't become self-conscious. When there's somebody who's hungry, oh, I have some thing here. I bought a sandwich from the grocery store. Here, you may have it. Or somebody comes and is lonely and needs someone to talk to, then you offer your time and please tell me what's happening. Someone who is just there with every situation and offers whatever is needed. Those are the 1,000 hands and eyes of the Bodhisattva of compassion. And yet, after that, okay, you go on, and when you're sleepy, you sleep. When you're hungry, you eat. No second thoughts about, oh, I did that person a great favor, and so on. So no separation at all. It's like somebody asleep, needing to adjust by needing to do something, adjusting one's pillow, and then going back to sleep. Then the koan continues. Yen said, I understand. And Tao then asked him, how do you understand it? Then Yun Yen again said, the whole body are hands and eyes. So remember, the question was, what does the Bodhisattva of compassion have to do with these 1,000 hands and eyes? And the answer was, oh, it's like somebody sleeping and then one adjusts the pillow with your hand. So it's that hand in the darkness that just adjusts it and does what it needs to do and then goes on back to sleep. That's, what does that mean? That the whole body, this body of mine is a hand and an eye, ready, open to see things as they are, and also ready to respond to each and everything as they are, as the need comes forth. As the need comes forth. But then Tao said, you've said quite a bit there, but you've only said 80%. Okay, 80%, there's still room for further growth and deepening and development. But then Yen said, how about you, elder brother? So these are two Dharma brothers, adepts in the practice already, who are checking themselves into their understanding of what this practice entails. Then Tao said, through the entire body is hand and eye. So these are two words in Chinese. First one, the whole body is hand and eye. This whole body is hand and eye. And then the other one said, the entire body, meaning not just the whole as such, but each and every component of this body is hand and eye. And also, this body is not just my physical body, but the whole earth, the whole universe as my body is hand and eye, watching out for each other and aiding one another. One of the things that have been reported about this pandemic is that there are also increasing amounts of random acts of compassion in people, natural responses of neighbors to their neighbors in need. Go on the internet and you will see those kinds of examples that are so heartwarming, giving us the hope that it's such a blessing to be a human being, to be able to do that, and also empowers us to want to live in that same way. One with an open heart to people, not because I want to do some good things for them so that I can feel good about myself, but because it is so natural, the only natural thing to do. to open my heart and live and give myself as the situation calls for. And so, in that light, what we can really receive from the spiritual practice is a way of breaking out of that shell of our loneliness, of our alienation, and of our suffering, and of our separation, to sense that interbeing. And if each of us takes our part and lives our life in that way, then we might just become agents of a new world in the making. A new world that does not bank on the story of separation, the story of our alienation from one another that breeds enmity and breeds violence and warfare and breeds this kind of class differences and racial and economic and social and other disparities, but one that would seek to fill in those gaps, and one that would seek a more equitable and a more just and a more compassionate way of living society, and a more compassionate way of allowing our institutions to run for the benefit of the living beings that it serves, that these institutions serve. That can be a new world in the making, that each of us can be an agent in transforming. We can be an agent of transformation of a new world that an author that I've come to really been fascinated by lately, Charles Eisenstein, says, it's the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And we are invited to start right there in our cushion and let that cushion bring us, while being grounded, bring us to the ends of the earth, to the ends of the universe, in offering ourselves as a gift to all in whatever way we are able, given our concrete gifts and talents, also considering our gaps and limitations. But each one of us then can be a gem that we offer as a gift to this community of gems that are sharing the treasures of the earth. That's what our spiritual practice can open to us. And in this time of pandemic, which I said is a critical time, it can lead us to destruction with more violence and more disparities. But if more and more of us, if a critical mass of us are able to take it and take the opportunity to go into that solitude that allows us to see our connectedness and allows us to see the holiness in each and everything, then that new world is already emerging. Let us make that new world happen from right here, right now, where we are.